Welcome to another episode of the Jarring Science Club. I'm your host, Brenda, and today we're going to learn about different preservation methods that you can use to keep apples from rotting. Here's what you'll need. An apple, 4 jars and 4 lids, a knife, some salt, some vinegar, and some water. This experiment is going to take about a month to complete, so make sure that you set it up in advance before you actually do the investigation portion of the experiment. There are a couple of safety notes in this experiment. You should not be eating any of the apple pieces that you've tried to preserve. This experiment is just to give you an idea of how these methods of food preservation work, and it is not done in a safe or sanitary enough way for you to be able to eat the apple later. So do not eat your apples after you have done your experiment, even if they look. All right, let's get started. All right, I brought you in closer so we can look at the experiment up close. So you're gonna cut, depending on how many preservation methods you're testing, which I'm testing 4, cut your apple into that many pieces. So here we have 4 pieces, 1 for each jar. So in each jar, you will add in your apple piece, and if it's just the air you're testing, go ahead and add the lid and screw it on. You just need to add enough of the material to cover the apple. Then screw the lid on and set them in a warm, dry location for about a month. Here's the science. First, we're going to talk about the salt. The salt is the most effective preservation method that we used in our experiment, and it was probably the same for yours. Salt is an interesting way of preserving food, and it's a very old form of preserving food. Salt works by binding the moisture that's inside of the apple and other foods with the salt, removing it from the apple so that there is less water molecules inside the apple to bind with bacteria, mold, and other organisms. Basically, the salt fills up the apple and takes up the space of those water molecules, which prevents the bacteria and mold from growing. It also makes the apple and thing that you're preserving very salty. The next preservation method we're going to be talking about is vinegar. Now, our vinegar made something very interesting. It made what's known as a SCOBY or a SCOBY, which is a layer of bacteria that gets on the top of your vinegar and has a fermenting effect. That is one of the ways that you can make fermented tea like kombucha, and you can also make apple cider vinegar using some of these techniques with the SCOBY. Using vinegar to preserve food is called pickling, and it is one of the main methods used to make actual pickles. Vinegar prevents bacteria and mold from forming on food because it changes the pH level of the apple. So vinegar has a very high acidity level. Its pH is very high, very acidic, and most bacteria and mold can't live at such a high acidity level. So by adding that to your apple mixture, you have created an acidic environment that cannot grow bacteria, and that's a preservation method. Now, our apple piece is not safe to eat because it has that SCOBY in there, which means that at some point bacteria was introduced and started to ferment. The sugars fermented and started to create their own colony of bacteria on the surface of the liquid. But if you are following the proper pickling methods, you can eat something that's been pickled. And if you've ever eaten a pickle, you know that a pickle is very sour and it tastes very acidic, almost like a lemon. And that's what would happen if you tried to eat an apple that you had preserved with vinegar. You shouldn't do it from your experiment because the conditions aren't right and there's a very high chance of you getting sick. The next method we tried was just water. And as you can see from here, it's all cloudy and gross. There's bacteria, there's mold starting to form. This would be a very unsafe apple to eat. Because the water has moisture and it's at a warm temperature, the bacteria has space to grow and multiply, and mold can form because there's nothing preventing those chemical reactions from happening. Now, just adding the lid to it does prevent some bacteria and mold from forming, but it is not enough to preserve the food and make it edible at a later date. It will rot. And then the apple with the air is a similar experience. It turns brown, it gets moldy, it shrivels, moisture leaves, bacteria enters, mold grows. There's mold starting to grow on the seeds. This is a highly toxic apple, not safe for consumption. So you can really tell the difference between the apples that have had the preservation methods applied, either by making them more acidic or removing the salt, and then the test control apple slices that were just left in the jar for a month. That's it for today. See you next time.